The hospital ship Solace floated silently in orbit around Earth, a gleaming white beacon against the endless blackness of space. Inside, the hum of machinery mixed with the soft beeping of monitors, creating an atmosphere that was both calm and tense. The crew moved about their duties with quiet efficiency, each person focused on their role. But beneath the surface, there was an unspoken anxiety. Rumors had spread among the staff about strange activity near Earth's borders, reports of an alien fleet moving closer every day. Dr. Emily Carter stood in one of the main medical bays, her hand steadied as she adjusted the settings on a life support machine for a critically injured soldier. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her sharp green eyes scanned the room constantly. She wasn't just a doctor. She was a leader here, someone people trusted when things went wrong. And lately, it felt like things were always going wrong. Nearby, Lieutenant Daniel Brooks paced along the corridor outside the bay. He was young, only 24, but his reputation for quick thinking and bravery made him a natural fit for security detail aboard the Solace. His uniform was crisp, though he'd loosened the top button to make himself more comfortable. He glanced at the screens mounted on the walls, which showed live feeds from the ship's external cameras. Space stretched out endlessly beyond the glass-like domes, empty except for the distant curve of Earth below. Still nothing, Daniel muttered under his breath, tapping a few buttons on his tablet. He knew better than to let his guard down, even if everything seemed quiet. Something about those rumors bothered him. Aliens weren't uncommon in human space anymore, but most species respected the neutrality of hospital ships. Most. Captain Matthew Hayes sat in the command center, staring at the same feeds Daniel had been checking moments earlier. A tall man with graying hair and a firm jawline, Hayes exuded authority without needing to say much. Around him, officers worked diligently at their stations, monitoring communications, navigation, and defensive systems. Everything appeared normal, or as normal as it could be given recent events. "Sir," said Rachel Morgan, the communications officer, breaking the silence. Her voice carried a note of urgency. "We're picking up something. A vessel approaching fast." Hayes leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowing. "Identify it." Rachel typed rapidly on her console. "Unknown signature, sir, not matching any known registries. They're hailing us." "Put them through," Hayes ordered, standing up straighter. A moment later, the screen in front of him flickered to life, revealing a face unlike anything anyone on the bridge had ever seen. The alien calling himself Zarnak had deep blue skin, glowing yellow eyes, and sharp ridges running down the sides of his head. His expression was cold, calculating. Behind him, other members of his crew moved silently, their forms blurred by shadows. "I am Zarnak," the alien began, his voice low and gravelly. "You possess technology we require. Hand it over, or face consequences." Hayes didn't flinch. "This is a hospital ship. We operate under intergalactic law. We are neutral and unarmed. You have no right to demand anything." Zarnak's lips curled into what might have been a sneer. "Neutrality means nothing to us. Comply, or suffer." Before Hayes could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. Red lights flashed overhead as klaxons warned of incoming danger. On the screen, Zarnak cut the transmission, leaving only static behind. Seconds later, the first impact rocked the Solace, throwing several officers off balance. "What was that?" Rachel shouted, gripping her console for support. "They've fired on us." Another officer yelled. Hayes clenched his fists but kept his voice steady. "Activate shields and prepare for combat. Alert all personnel. This is no longer a peaceful mission." As chaos erupted across the ship, Dr. Carter grabbed a nearby nurse. "Get the patients secure. Now," she commanded, already heading toward the cryogenic chambers where the most vulnerable individuals lay. Meanwhile, Daniel sprinted toward the armory, his mind racing. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. They were no longer safe. And neither was Earth. The attack came without mercy. Explosions tore through the outer hull of the Solace, sending shockwaves rippling through its corridors. Alarms screamed in every corner of the ship, their shrill tones mixing with the panicked shouts of the crew and patients. Smoke filled the air as fires erupted from damaged systems, and sparks rained down from broken panels overhead. The peaceful hum of the hospital ship had been replaced by the chaos of battle. Dr. Emily Carter moved quickly, her white coat billowing behind her as she ran toward the medical bay. Her mind raced with questions, but there was no time to dwell on them. She had to focus on protecting her patients. Around her, nurses scrambled to wheel stretchers into secure rooms, while others tried to calm frightened civilians. Some of the injured soldiers groaned in pain as vibrations from the blasts shook their beds. "This way," she shouted to a group of medics pushing a gurney. "Get them to the lower deck. It's safer there." Nearby, Lieutenant Daniel Brooks reached the armory, his heart pounding in his chest. He grabbed a weapon from the rack and checked its charge before slinging it over his shoulder. Other members of the security team followed suit, arming themselves as fast as they could. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but Daniel refused to let fear take hold. This was his ship, his responsibility, and he wasn't going to let anyone harm the people aboard it. "Listen up," he said, turning to face his team. His voice was firm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "We don't know how many of them are inside yet, but we need to hold them off long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Stick together and stay sharp." The team nodded, their faces tense but determined. Together, they rushed out of the armory and headed toward the breach point where the aliens had boarded. Along the way, they passed terrified civilians huddled in doorways or crouching behind overturned furniture. Daniel stopped briefly to reassure a young woman clutching her child. "Stay low and get to the emergency shelters," he told her. "We'll handle this." On the bridge, Captain Matthew Hayes barked orders to his officers, trying to regain control of the situation. The shields were failing under the relentless assault, and sections of the ship were already losing power. Rachel Morgan worked furiously at her station, attempting to reestablish contact with the alien vessel. "They're jamming us, sir," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "I can't get through." Hayes clenched his jaw. "Keep trying. We need to understand what they want and why they're doing this." As if in response, another explosion rocked the ship, throwing several crew members to the floor. Sparks flew from a nearby console, forcing an officer to dive out of the way. Hayes steadied himself against the railing, his eyes scanning the screens for any sign of hope. So far, all he saw was destruction. Meanwhile, Dr. Carter reached the cryogenic chambers, where rows of pods held critically ill patients in suspended animation. These chambers contained experimental treatments, advanced technology that could revolutionize medicine. But now, they were also a target. Kneeling beside one of the pods, she adjusted its settings to ensure stability during the ongoing turbulence. "We have to move these," she told Lauren Simmons, a nurse who had followed her. "If the aliens find them." She didn't finish the sentence. Both women knew what was at stake. If the invaders got their hands on the technology, it could be used for something far worse than healing. Back near the breach, Daniel and his team encountered their first wave of attackers. The aliens were tall and muscular, their bodies covered in sleek black armor. Their weapons emitted strange pulses of energy that crackled through the air. The security team opened fire, exchanging shots in a narrow corridor. The sound was deafening, and the smell of burnt metal filled the space. Daniel ducked behind a fallen piece of debris as an energy bolt sizzled past his head. He returned fire, hitting one of the aliens squarely in the chest. It staggered backward but didn't fall. These creatures weren't easy to stop. "Fall back," Daniel yelled, realizing they couldn't win this fight head-on. "Draw them away from the civilians." As the team retreated, Daniel glanced over his shoulder. The aliens were advancing steadily, their glowing eyes fixed on their prey. For the first time since the attack began, doubt crept into his mind. How long could they hold out? And even if Earth sent reinforcements, Would it be too late? Far below, on the planet's surface, military commanders watched the distress signal flashing across their screens. Admiral Robert Klein leaned forward in his chair, his expression grim. The Solace was supposed to be untouchable, a symbol of humanity's compassion in the stars. Whoever had attacked it would pay dearly. But for now, the crew of the Solace was alone, outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting for their lives. The battle raged on, spreading through the corridors of the Solace like wildfire. Smoke clouded the air, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The once sterile hallways were now littered with debris, shattered glass, and scorch marks from alien weapons. Patients and civilians scrambled for safety, their faces pale with fear. Amidst the chaos, Dr. Emily Carter worked tirelessly, her movements quick but deliberate as she tried to keep everyone alive. In one of the lower medical bays, Lauren Simmons helped carry a stretcher holding an unconscious soldier. "Where do we take him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "To the emergency shelter," Emily replied, glancing over her shoulder. "It's shielded better than these rooms. We can't risk losing anyone else." Lauren nodded and hurried forward, her arms straining under the weight of the stretcher. Emily stayed behind long enough to check on another patient, a young man who had been caught in the crossfire when the first explosion hit. His breathing was shallow, and blood soaked through the bandages wrapped around his chest. She adjusted his oxygen mask and whispered words of reassurance before moving on. Nearby, Lieutenant Daniel Brooks and his team fought desperately to hold back the advancing aliens. They had managed to lure the invaders away from the main medical areas, but the enemy kept coming. Each corridor became a battleground, filled with bursts of energy and the sharp crackle of weapons fire. Daniel fired his weapon again, hitting one of the aliens in the shoulder. It stumbled but didn't fall, its glowing eyes fixed on him with cold determination. "Watch your backs," he shouted to his team. "They're flanking us." One of the security officers turned just in time to see an alien lunging toward him. Before he could react, Daniel tackled the creature, knocking it off balance. He rolled to his feet and fired again, this time striking the alien in the head. It collapsed, its body twitching briefly before going still. "We can't keep this up forever," another officer yelled, reloading his weapon. Sweat dripped down his face as he glanced nervously at the growing number of enemies. Daniel knew they were right. The aliens were relentless, and every second they spent fighting was another second the crew and patients were in danger. But there was no other choice. If they gave up, the entire ship, and everyone on it, would be lost. Back on the bridge, Captain Matthew Hayes struggled to maintain order. The ship's systems were failing rapidly, and the lights flickered intermittently, plunging sections of the room into darkness. Rachel Morgan continued working at her station, her fingers flying across the console as she attempted to decode the alien signals. "They're targeting something specific," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the noise. "I think they're after the cryogenic chambers." Hayes froze, his mind racing. The chambers contained not only critically ill patients, but also experimental treatments that could revolutionize medicine or be turned into weapons. If the aliens got their hands on them. "Sound the alarm," he ordered sharply. "Tell Dr. Carter to secure the chambers at all costs." Rachel relayed the message, and moments later, Emily received it on her wrist communicator. Her heart sank. Securing the chambers meant risking her life and the lives of her team. But she didn't hesitate. Turning to Lauren, she said, "Gather anyone you can find. We need to protect those chambers." As they rushed toward the cryogenic area, explosions rocked the ship again, throwing them off balance. Emily steadied herself against a wall, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge. When they finally reached the chambers, they found a group of terrified nurses and medics huddled inside, trying to barricade the doors. "It won't hold them for long," one of the nurses said, tears streaming down her face. Emily took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "We'll make it hold. Everyone, grab whatever you can use as a weapon. We're not letting them in here." Meanwhile, Daniel and his team fought their way closer to the breach point, hoping to slow the alien advance. As they turned a corner, they came face to face with a larger group of invaders. The aliens raised their weapons, and Daniel realized they were outnumbered 2-1. "Hold your ground," he yelled, raising his own weapon. But even as he prepared to fight, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Far above, the distress signal from the Solace continued to flash across Earth's monitoring stations. Admiral Robert Klein watched grimly, knowing that help wouldn't arrive soon enough. For now, the crew of the hospital ship was on its own, fighting for survival against overwhelming odds. The situation aboard the Solace grew more desperate with each passing minute. The aliens were pushing deeper into the ship, their weapons tearing through walls and systems alike. The crew fought back as best they could, but it was clear that time was running out. Dr. Emily Carter stood in the cryogenic chamber, her mind racing as she tried to think of a way to protect the patients and the dangerous technology inside the pods. "We can't hold them off forever," Lauren Simmons said, her voice trembling. She held a metal pipe tightly in her hands, ready to defend herself if needed. Around them, the nurses and medics had armed themselves with whatever they could find. Scissors, broken chair legs, even pieces of debris from the damaged walls. Emily nodded, her expression grim. "We won't have to," she said finally, an idea forming in her head. "There's one thing we haven't tried yet." She turned to a nearby console and began typing furiously. The others watched silently, unsure of what she was doing. After a moment, she stopped and looked up at them. "The power core," she explained quickly. "If we overload it, we can create an electromagnetic pulse. It'll disable all electronics, including their weapons and ships. But it'll also knock out our systems." Lauren's eyes widened. "That's insane. What happens to us?" "We'll survive," Emily said firmly, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. "The shields will keep us safe long enough for the pulse to dissipate, but we need to act fast. If those aliens get past us, it's over." Before anyone could argue, Emily grabbed a small device from the console and handed it to Lauren. "Take this. Go to the lower deck and activate the failsafe sequence when I give the signal. Don't wait for me." Lauren hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful," she whispered before hurrying away. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Daniel Brooks and his team were still locked in combat with the aliens. They had managed to slow the invaders' progress, but the enemy kept coming, wave after wave. Daniel fired his weapon again, hitting another alien square in the chest. This time, it fell, but 2 more took its place. "We're not going to last much longer," one of the officers shouted, reloading his weapon with shaking hands. Daniel gritted his teeth. He knew they couldn't keep fighting like this. Every step the aliens took brought them closer to the cryogenic chambers, and whatever secrets lay within. He glanced at his communicator, hoping for some kind of update from the bridge. But there was only static. "Fall back," he ordered, realizing they needed to regroup. "We'll make our stand at the next junction." As they retreated, Daniel noticed something strange, a faint blue glow coming from one of the nearby rooms. Curious, he motioned for his team to follow him. Inside, they found an alien lying on the floor, injured but still alive. Its armor was cracked, revealing pale skin beneath. For a moment, Daniel considered finishing it off, but something stopped him. "Who are you?" he asked cautiously, keeping his weapon trained on the creature. The alien groaned, its glowing eyes dimming slightly. When it spoke, its voice was weak but clear. "Kale. Scientist," it rasped. "Not soldier." Daniel frowned, lowering his weapon slightly. "You're not with them." Kale shook his head, or at least attempted to. "Zarnak. Lies. Misinformation. Your people. Building weapons. False." Daniel's heart sank. If Cal was telling the truth, then the attack on the Solace was based on a misunderstanding, a deadly mistake that had already cost countless lives. But there was no time to dwell on it now. "We'll sort this out later," Daniel said, helping Cale to his feet. "Right now, we need your help." On the bridge, Captain Matthew Hayes listened intently as Rachel Morgan relayed Emily's plan. His face was pale, but his voice remained steady. "Do it," he said without hesitation. "But make sure everyone knows what's coming. We don't want any surprises." Rachel nodded and sent out an urgent message to the entire crew, warning them about the impending EMP. As the countdown began, Hayes turned to look out the viewport, his eyes fixed on the distant curve of Earth below. He didn't know if they would survive this, but he knew one thing for certain. They weren't going down without a fight. Back in the cryogenic chamber, Emily gave the signal to Lauren. The young nurse pressed the button on the device, initiating the failsafe sequence. Alarms blared throughout the ship, louder than ever before. The aliens paused, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. And then everything went dark. The electromagnetic pulse hit the Solace like a wave, sweeping through every corridor and system. Lights flickered and died, plunging the ship into darkness. The hum of machinery ceased, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. Then came the groans and shouts of confusion from both humans and aliens alike. In the cryogenic chamber, Dr. Emily Carter gripped the edge of a console to steady herself. Her heart pounded in her chest as she waited for any sign that the EMP had worked. Around her, the nurses and medics stayed close, their makeshift weapons still clutched tightly in their hands. The air was thick with tension, and no one dared to speak. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor outside. Emily held her breath, ready to defend the chamber if necessary. But instead of the glowing eyes of an alien attacker, Lieutenant Daniel Brooks appeared in the doorway, his face streaked with soot and sweat. Behind him stood Cale, the injured alien scientist he had rescued. "It's done," Daniel said, his voice hoarse but relieved. "Their weapons are down." Emily nodded, exhaling sharply. "Good. Now we just need to hold out until reinforcements arrive." Cale stepped forward hesitantly, his movements slow and cautious. His cracked armor made him look even more vulnerable than before. "I can help," he rasped. "Zarnak must be stopped." Before anyone could respond, Captain Matthew Hayes' voice crackled over the ship's intercom. Though weak and distorted, it carried authority. "Attention all crew members. The EMP has disabled enemy systems. Secure your positions and prepare for recovery operations. Reinforcements are en route." The announcement brought a small measure of hope to the weary survivors. But Emily knew they weren't safe yet. The aliens might have lost their weapons, but they were still aboard the ship. And still dangerous. "We need to get to the bridge," she said firmly. "Captain Hayes will need our support." Daniel agreed, motioning for his team to follow. Together, they moved cautiously through the darkened corridors, avoiding areas where alien forces might regroup. Along the way, they encountered other crew members who had survived the attack. Some were injured, others shaken but determined to fight back. As they neared the command center, they heard the unmistakable sound of scuffling ahead. Peering around a corner, they saw a group of aliens attempting to break through a sealed door using brute force. Their weapons lay useless at their sides, but their strength alone posed a threat. "We can't let them reach the bridge," Daniel whispered urgently. Emily looked at Cale, who nodded grimly. "Distract them," he said quietly. "I will lead you to Zarnak." Without hesitation, Daniel raised his weapon, a simple metal pipe, and charged forward, shouting loudly to draw the aliens' attention. Startled, the creatures turned toward him, giving Emily and the others a chance to slip past unnoticed. Cale led them down a narrow service tunnel, guiding them toward the alien command center. "You're taking a big risk helping us," Emily said to Cale as they walked. "Why?" Cale paused, his glowing eyes dimmer now but filled with resolve. "My people, not warriors. We sought knowledge, not war." Zarnak twisted the truth to justify this attack. I cannot stand by it while innocent lives are lost. His words struck a chord with Emily, reminding her of why she had chosen to become a doctor. To save lives, no matter the cost. She nodded silently, grateful for his courage. When they finally reached the command center, they found Zarnak standing over a console, frantically trying to restore power to his fleet. His glowing yellow eyes widened in surprise when he saw them enter. "You dare defy me," he snarled, raising a fist. But before he could act, Daniel burst into the room, followed by the rest of the security team. Outnumbered and unarmed, Zarnak hesitated, then growled in frustration. "It's over," Daniel said firmly, stepping forward. "Your fleet is disabled. Surrender, or face the consequences." For a long moment, Zarnak stared at them, his expression unreadable. Then, with a low growl, he lowered his fists. "This is not the end," he muttered darkly. "Earth will pay for its lies." As the security team secured Zarnak, Emily turned to Kale. "Thank you," she said simply. "We couldn't have done this without you." Kale nodded, his gaze distant. "The truth must come out. Only then can peace be possible." Far below, Admiral Robert Klein watched as reports poured in about the Solace. The alien fleet had been neutralized, but the battle wasn't truly won yet. As he prepared to send reinforcements, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of future awaited humanity, and whether trust could ever replace fear. The command center of the Solace was quiet now, though the tension still lingered in the air. Zarnak stood under guard, his glowing eyes fixed on the floor, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Around him, the crew worked quickly to secure the area and assess the damage. Dr. Emily Carter leaned against a wall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she caught her breath. The adrenaline that had fueled her for hours was beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep exhaustion. Kale, the alien scientist, moved cautiously among the humans, observing their efforts with a mixture of curiosity and guilt. He approached Emily, his steps slow and deliberate. "Your people, they were brave," he said quietly, "even when everything seemed lost." Emily looked at him, her expression softening slightly. "We didn't have a choice," she replied. "There are lives at stake here, not just ours, but everyone aboard this ship." Kale nodded, his glowing eyes dimming further. "I know. That is why I must tell you the truth about Zarnak, and why we attacked." He explained how Zarnak had manipulated his own people, spreading false information about Earth secretly developing weapons using advanced medical technology. Kel revealed that the aliens believed humanity posed a threat to their survival, though none of it was true. His voice trembled as he admitted that he had suspected the lies but stayed silent out of fear. "We were wrong," Kel concluded, "and now many have suffered because of it." Emily listened carefully, her mind racing. If what Kel said was true, then the attack on the Solace wasn't just an act of aggression. It was a tragic misunderstanding. She shared a glance with Lieutenant Daniel Brooks, who stood nearby, his weapon still trained on Zarnak. Daniel's face was unreadable, but Emily could see the weight of everything they'd endured etched into his features. "We need to share this with Captain Hayes," Emily said finally. "If we can prove Zarnak lied, maybe we can avoid more bloodshed." Daniel agreed, motioning for two officers to escort Zarnak to the holding cells. As they led him away, Zarnak shot one last glare at Kale. "You betray your own kind," he spat. "Mark my words, this will not end well for you." Kale ignored him, turning back to Emily. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we wait," Daniel answered. "Earth's fleet is on its way. They'll decide what comes next." On the bridge, Captain Matthew Hayes sat in his chair, staring at the darkened screens before him. The EMP had crippled the ship's systems, leaving them blind and vulnerable. Rachel Morgan worked tirelessly to restore partial power, her fingers moving rapidly across her console. Slowly, faint lights began to flicker back to life, casting a dim glow over the room. "We've got limited navigation back online," Rachel reported, relief evident in her voice. but it'll take time to get full functionality. Hayes nodded, leaning forward slightly. Do what you can. Every second counts. As Emily, Daniel, and Cale arrived on the bridge, Hayes turned to greet them. His expression softened when he saw Cale standing alongside the others. "So, you're the one who helped us," he said, studying the alien carefully. "I did what I had to," Cale replied. "My people were missiled. I want to make things right." Hayes considered this for a moment, then gestured for Emily to explain what she had learned. As she recounted Cale's story, Hayes' brow furrowed deeper with each word. When she finished, he let out a long sigh. "If what you say is true, this changes everything," Hayes said gravely. "But proving it won't be easy. We'll need evidence, something concrete to show Admiral Klein and the rest of Earth's leadership." Cale stepped forward, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "I can provide that." Zarnak kept records of his plans, all stored in his flagship's database. "If you allow me to access it, I can retrieve the proof you need." Hayes exchanged a look with Daniel, who gave a slight nod. It was risky trusting an alien, even one who had helped them. But they didn't have many options left. "Do it," Hayes said finally. "But you go with him," he added, pointing to Daniel. "Keep an eye on him. And stay safe." As Cale and Daniel prepared to leave, Emily stopped them briefly. "Be careful," she said, her tone firm but concerned. "We've already lost too much today." Daniel gave her a small smile. "We'll be fine. Just hold down the fort until we get back." With that, the unlikely pair set off toward the docking bay, where a small shuttle awaited them. Outside the viewport, the alien fleet hung motionless in space, their ships dark and silent. For now, the immediate threat was neutralized. But no one knew how long that peace would last. Far below, Admiral Robert Klein watched as his fleet closed in on the Solace. The battle may have been won, but the war for trust and understanding was only beginning. The shuttle carrying Daniel Brooks and Cale moved silently through the void of space, its engines humming faintly as it approached the alien flagship. The massive vessel loomed ahead, its sleek black surface scarred by the EMP blast. Though powerless and dark, it still radiated an intimidating presence, like a sleeping predator waiting to awaken. Inside the shuttle, Daniel gripped his weapon tightly, his eyes darting between Cale and the controls. He trusted the alien scientist, at least as much as he could trust anyone right now, but that didn't mean he was going to let his guard down. "You sure about this?" he asked, breaking the silence. Cale nodded, his glowing eyes reflecting the dim light of the cockpit. "I know where Zarnak kept his records. If we can access them, it will prove everything." Daniel frowned, glancing out at the flagship. "And if something goes wrong, what if your people are still on board?" "They won't be," Cale replied confidently. "Zarnak's soldiers follow orders blindly. With him captured, they'll retreat to their own ships or attempt repairs. Trust me, I know my kind." Daniel wasn't convinced, but there wasn't time to argue. They had one chance to get the evidence they needed before Earth's fleet arrived, and tensions escalated further. As the shuttle docked with the alien ship, he took a deep breath and prepared himself for whatever lay ahead. The airlock opened with a hiss, revealing a dark corridor beyond. The interior of the flagship was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft echo of their footsteps on the metallic floor. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the walls. Cale led the way, moving with purpose despite the oppressive atmosphere. "This way," he whispered, gesturing toward a set of sealed doors at the end of the hall. "The central archive is just beyond." As they approached, Daniel noticed movement in the distance, figures silhouetted against the faint glow of emergency lighting. His heart skipped a beat. "We're not alone," he muttered, raising his weapon. Cale froze, squinting into the darkness. "Wait," he said after a moment. "Those aren't soldiers. They're engineers trying to restore power. We can slip past them if we're careful." Daniel hesitated, but ultimately nodded. Staying hidden was better than risking another fight, especially when they were so close to their goal. Keeping low, they crept along the edges of the corridor, avoiding the engineer's notice. When they finally reached the archive doors, Cale worked quickly to override the manual lock using a handheld device. "Hurry," Daniel urged, glancing over his shoulder nervously. Every second felt like an eternity. The doors slid open with a soft whir, revealing rows of data consoles and storage units. Cale rushed to one of the terminals, his fingers flying over the interface. After a few tense moments, the screen lit up, displaying streams of alien text and schematics. "I found it," Cale said triumphantly. "These logs show Zarnak's plans, the misinformation campaign, the attack strategy, everything." Daniel stepped closer, watching as Cale transferred the files to a portable drive. "Good work," he said, though his relief was short-lived. A sudden noise echoed from behind them, a loud clang followed by hurried footsteps. "They've spotted us," Daniel whispered sharply, turning toward the entrance. Sure enough, several alien figures appeared in the doorway, their expressions unreadable beneath their helmets. Cale raised his hand slowly, speaking in his native tongue. The aliens hesitated, clearly surprised to see one of their own working with a human. Taking advantage of their confusion, Daniel fired a warning shot into the ceiling, causing the group to scatter. "Go," he shouted to Cale, covering him as they made their way back toward the shuttle. Back on the Solace, Captain Matthew Hayes paced anxiously on the bridge. Time was running out. Earth's fleet would arrive soon, and without concrete evidence, Admiral Klein might order an all-out assault on the alien ships. Rachel Morgan monitored communications, her face pale with worry. "They're coming," she reported suddenly. "Admiral Klein is demanding a status update." Hayes clenched his fists. "Tell him we're holding position. Reinforcements are en route." Just then, Emily Carter entered the bridge, her expression tense. "Any word from Daniel and Cal?" she asked. Before Hayes could answer, the comms crackled to life. "This is Brooks," came Daniel's voice, strained but clear. "We've got the data. Heading back now." Relief washed over the crew, but it was short-lived. Outside the viewport, the first ships of Earth's fleet began to appear, their weapons trained on the alien vessels. The standoff was far from over, and neither side seemed ready to back down. For now, the fate of both species rested in the fragile hope that truth could overcome fear. The shuttle carrying Daniel, Brooks, and Cale raced back toward the Solace, its engines straining to close the gap between them and safety. Behind them, the alien flagship remained dark and silent, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His knuckles were white as he gripped the controls, his eyes darting to the rear viewport every few seconds. "We're not out of this yet," he muttered, glancing at Call, who sat beside him clutching the portable drive containing the critical evidence. Cale nodded, his expression grim. "If Zarnak's forces regroup before we can share the truth, it won't matter what we've done." Daniel didn't respond. He focused on navigating the shuttle through the growing tension in space. Ahead, the sleek form of the Solace came into view, surrounded by the imposing shapes of Earth's warships. The sight was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because help had arrived, but terrifying because one wrong move could spark an all-out conflict. As they docked with the hospital ship, Captain Matthew Hayes met them in the hangar bay, his face lined with worry. "Did you get it?" he asked without preamble. "Yes," Daniel replied, stepping out of the shuttle. "But we need to act fast. Admiral Klein is already here." Hayes took the drive from Cale and gestured for everyone to follow him. They moved quickly through the dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing in the near silence. The crew they passed along the way looked exhausted, their faces pale and streaked with soot, but there was a flicker of hope in their eyes now that reinforcements had arrived. On the bridge, Admiral Robert Klein's stern face appeared on the main screen, his voice sharp and commanding. "Captain Hayes, report. What is the status of the alien fleet?" Hayes stepped forward, holding up the portable drive. Admiral, we have evidence proving the attack was based on misinformation spread by Zarnak. If we act now, we may be able to avoid further bloodshed. Klein frowned, his gaze narrowing. Evidence. Explain yourself. Before Hayes could answer, Dr. Emily Carter spoke up, her tone calm but firm. The aliens believed Earth was secretly developing weapons using advanced medical technology. It was a lie, a deliberate deception by their leader to justify the assault. This data proves it. Klein hesitated, clearly torn between caution and aggression. Finally, he leaned closer to the screen. Transfer the files immediately. My analysts will verify their authenticity. While Rachel Morgan worked to send the data to the Admiral's flagship, Cale stepped forward, addressing the screen directly. Admiral, I speak on behalf of those among my people who seek peace. We were missiled, just as you were. Please, let us work together to prevent more suffering. For a long moment, Klein said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. Very well. Stand down your forces. No hostile actions will be taken until we review the evidence. The tension on the bridge eased slightly, though no one relaxed completely. Outside the viewport, the massive warships of Earth's fleet held their positions, their weapons still trained on the alien vessels. It was a fragile truce, one that could shatter at any moment. As the crew waited anxiously for the analysis to finish, Daniel turned to Cale. You really think your people will listen if we show them the truth? Cale sighed, his glowing eyes dimming slightly. Some will, others may not. But even if only a few are willing to change, it's a start. Hours passed before Admiral Klein reappeared on the screen, his expression graver than before. The evidence appears legitimate, he announced. Zarnak manipulated both sides into conflict. However, this does not excuse the attack on a neutral hospital ship. No, it doesn't, Hayes agreed firmly. But retaliation won't solve anything. Let's use this as an opportunity to open dialogue, not escalate violence. Klein considered this, then gave a curt nod. Very well. We'll extend an offer of negotiation, but under our terms. Any sign of aggression from their side, and we will respond accordingly. With that, the transmission ended, leaving the crew of the Solace to process what had just happened. For the first time in hours, they allowed themselves a small measure of relief. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the road ahead would be difficult. Dr. Carter approached Cale, her expression thoughtful. Thank you for helping us. Without you, none of this would have been possible. Cale bowed his head slightly. I only wish I had acted sooner. Perhaps then, lives could have been saved. As the crew worked to stabilize the damaged ship, the alien fleet began to retreat, disappearing into the vastness of space. The battle might have ended, but the scars it left behind would take much longer to heal. And somewhere, in the silence between stars, questions lingered. About trust, about fear, and about whether peace was truly possible. Weeks passed, and the fragile negotiations between humanity and the alien faction began to take shape. The Solace, though still scared from the attack, had been repaired enough to resume limited operations. Its crew continued their mission of healing, treating both human survivors and wounded aliens who had sought refuge aboard the ship. For Dr. Emily Carter, this symbolized something greater, a small but significant step toward understanding between species. Cale remained a constant presence on the Solace, acting as both an ambassador and a bridge between worlds. His efforts to foster trust earned him respect among the crew, even from those who had initially doubted his intentions. During one quiet evening in the medical bay, he watched as Emily worked alongside Lauren Simmons to treat an injured alien soldier. The sight filled him with cautious optimism. They're learning, Cale said softly, addressing Lieutenant Daniel Brooks, who stood nearby. Both sides are beginning to see each other not as enemies, but as individuals. Daniel nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. It's not perfect, but it's a start. People are scared, on both sides. It's going to take time for them to let go of that fear. Captain Matthew Hayes shared similar thoughts during a meeting with Admiral Robert Klein aboard the flagship Eclipse. The Admiral's demeanor had softened slightly over the weeks, though his focus remained sharp. Together, they reviewed updates on the progress of negotiations, discussing ways to ensure lasting peace rather than temporary truces. "We need to establish clear rules moving forward," Hayes suggested. "Boundaries that protect neutral zones like the Solace while allowing for open communication." Klein agreed, though his tone carried a note of caution. "And we must remain vigilant. Trust is earned, not given freely. One wrong move could undo everything we've worked for." The negotiations culminated in a historic agreement signed aboard the Solace. Representatives from Earth and the alien faction gathered in the ship's observation deck, where the vast expanse of space served as a reminder of how much was at stake. Cale stood beside Emily as the documents were finalized, his glowing eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and hope. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly, "but it is a good beginning." Emily smiled faintly, her heart swelling with emotion. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges and setbacks. Yet she also believed that moments like this, moments of cooperation and shared purpose, could light the way forward. As the ceremony concluded, Captain Hayes addressed the assembled crowd. "Today, we choose to move beyond fear and anger. We choose to build something stronger, together. Let this be a lesson to us all, that even in the darkest times, there is always a chance for change." The words resonated deeply, earning nods of agreement from both humans and aliens alike. Outside the viewport, Earth's fleet and the remaining alien ships drifted side by side, their weapons powered down. It was a powerful image, one of unity amidst uncertainty. In the days that followed, life aboard the Solace returned to a semblance of normalcy. Patients recovered, systems hummed back to full capacity, and the crew found solace in their shared resilience. Cale prepared to leave the ship, returning to his people to help guide them through the transition. Before departing, he thanked Emily and the others for their courage and compassion. "You've given us a chance," he said sincerely. "Do not waste it." As the Solace departed orbit to begin its next mission, Emily stood on the observation deck, gazing out at the stars. Beside her, Daniel joined her in silence, both of them lost in thought. The scars of the past would never fully fade, but they no longer defined them. Instead, they served as reminders of what had been overcome, and what could still be achieved. Far below, Earth continued its steady rotation, oblivious to the struggles and triumphs that had unfolded above. But somewhere within the hearts of those aboard the Solace, a spark of hope burned brightly. A fragile peace had been forged, born from sacrifice and understanding. And though the future remained uncertain, one truth was undeniable: together, anything was possible.